Hey guys, today we're talking about VeChain. VeChain, well, let's first introduce ourselves, I guess. It's not just me today, Alex Shubsnees, partner at Rhythm Technologies, but also have Chris here with me, another partner, Rhythm Technologies.
Howdy.
Yeah, combined, we got quite a few years behind us. Chris, how long have you been in the space now?
About 10 years.
Yeah, right. So just a little
Since,
bit. Just
yeah, November 2008. So,
man. All right. Probably probably save that story for another video.
yeah, yeah.
But let's just dive right in. Well, we'll kind of explain what VeChain is, and then we'll kind of give our opinions on it, what we like, what we don't like, maybe kind of temper some of the excitement we see a lot with it. But just off the start, it's VeChain's based in Singapore. They're really aiming to disrupt that whole supply chain industry. With this, process of asset digitization, which we do see a lot of other projects doing. We've talked about uh, Walton chain, for instance, with RFID tags and chips. So, with the vision to create greater market transparency on the supply chain, all the components are recorded, securely stored on the blockchain with the combination of all these different technologies. And the idea that blockchains are immutable, right, Chris? I mean, it seems like from what I can tell is there's a huge. I don't really understand the interest, but I guess when you look at the blockchain and you look at like what the blockchain technology allows for, it allows for that immutability and transparency. So I guess everyone's first thought is money. Second thought is storage of like recorded record keeping. I mean, it seems like it's a huge trend right now. All the different conferences we go to and everyone we speak to, it seems like everyone's putting things on the blockchain. Uh,
Yeah, I know that VeChain's big thing when they first started their project a couple of years ago was they really wanted to target luxury goods in terms
mm,
of combating counterfeit.
okay.
So their goal initially was, take very high dollar items and put them onto a blockchain so that you can verify that you have legitimate goods, which does require a lot of additional steps being taken by business partners. So the CEO of VeChain actually, let me see, he was the previous, I think, CIO for I don't remember what luxury company. Um,
You know.
Louis Vuitton,
Oh,
China. So he
okay.
has a lot of experience in luxury goods, and that's
Hmm.
that's kind of where this started from. So that's where they had originally planned to take the project. But then they said, well, supply chains are much more vast than just luxury goods, right? You have cold chain project or products like produce and other food items, and making sure that you're keeping track of all these things. So that was kind of the big thing that they then moved into. And as you mentioned, they're a direct competitor with Walton Chain. And
Hmm.
one of the big differences is that Walton Chain is producing all of their RFID chips themselves, whereas VeChain is partnering with a bunch of different distributors for various technologies, including RFID. What are some of the other ones that they're using? They're using QR codes, near field communication tags to keep track of things outside of just RFID, which is a centralization issue that you did mention with
Hmm.
Walton.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I from what I could tell is when I first heard of them, and then we they started off as that luxury chain supply chain, and they saw personally I think they saw what success Ethereum had with kind of broadening what's capable on their platform, and they said, well, all right, well we can do that, and we have these connections, and we can create more of an enterprise focused Ethereum. That's kind of the way I view VeChain, especially with the way they've now kind of shifted from just tracking everything, and where these different entities involved can receive private keys, to kind of get rid of all the attempts to commit fraud, counterfeiting, brand theft, all this other stuff that you had just mentioned with the luxury goods. And I kind of just, it seems like they just want to introduce their new development plans, in the form of a blockchain to compete against Ethereum. But they had all these resources, and they wanted to do something with it. Is kind of how I
yeah,
feel about it.
yeah, and for those that aren't aware, when VeChain first launched, it was an ERC20 token. that essentially was just a token for, I guess, acting as a security of of the project itself. And they clearly saw that there was a lot of limitations in terms of scalability with Ethereum, and I think that it had been in their plan from the start to launch their own blockchain, which is where this whole VeChain Thor originated from. For those that heard about this and didn't quite understand what's VeChain and what's VeChain Thor. VeChain Thor was just the rebranding and launch of their own blockchain. And so when that occurred, those who had VeChain, which was the ticker VEN, got VeChain, the new one. It's, for clarification's sake, it's not actually VeChain Thor, but the new ticker was VET, and that was distributed at a 1 to 100 ratio. So if you had one VeChain VEN, you got 100 VeChain VET. And then they also adopted a similar model to Neo in the sense that you have two separate tokens. You have VET, which is now VeChain, and then you had the VThor token, which is essentially analogous to gas in Neo. So that's what's paying for transactions. And you generate the VThor tokens in a very similar way, where you stake your VeChain, your VET, to get distributions of the VThor token that you then are supposed to be able to use to pay for transactions. And it's not something that's actually openly traded on the markets right now, as far as I know. And this is kind of a way of them trying to manipulate and control prices to keep things, I guess, affordable for these supply chain companies so that they can adopt the technology. So that's where this whole split of the token and why we have a whole bunch of different things floating around out there, just for clarification's sake.
Yeah. I think decoupling those different assets kind of creates more flexibility. There's obviously trade-offs when it comes to all these different price fluctuations, complications, just a few different ones. But when you have these two different assets, similar to Neo, they see more flexibility when it comes to enterprise solutions, right? So using kind of Ethereum as their base, VeChain kind of decided that, well, they wanted to align their use cases more closely with a heavier focus on that business application. And for business application, they did the scaling now. And Ethereum clearly just, the scaling isn't there for the partnerships that VeChain has, and they wanted to leverage, right? So they're using a proof of authority consensus algorithm where there are different nodes and master nodes in play, right? So nodes receive VTHL as a reward for maintaining the network, kind of how Chris just kind of went over. And there's like a 4-node system in place, right? So depending on the maturity date of each of these VET held nodes, right? However much the VET, how much the node holds the VET, it'll be classified as like one of the 4: strength, thunder, Mordor. All these nodes are entitled to 1 vote in any sort of like really key decision, such as like electing members on the board of VeChain or deciding changes to the consensus algorithm. It's kind of an interesting thing. There's probably some pretty interesting dynamics that I haven't really looked at and how these are actually playing out. I don't know. Have you really taken a look at this like tier-based system?
Yeah, it's a weighted voting mechanic, where they say on their website they're trying to blend the right amount of decentralization and centralization. So the centralization comes from this idea of having authority masternodes, which, as far as I understand, you have to be staking at least 25 million VeChain, so VET, in order to even qualify to be one of these, and then you have to apply. So this is kind of the centralization side of it, where you have to apply to then get approved by the VeChain team as well as the community, supposedly. And the last I heard, they had 101 of these nodes, and they had plans to be able to scale that up, as far as I understood it. And the way that they have it set up now, with the number of nodes that they have, they can achieve about 50 transactions per second, which obviously is definitely not enough to handle supply chain management at the level that they are envisioning with all the partnerships that they've been forming. So they claim that their system should be able to scale up to 10,000 transactions per second, which obviously would probably be enough throughput to handle supply chains. But it's a scaling issue. They're still not there. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds and how that affects pricing of the VTHO, which is the VTHOR token that is going to be used to be essentially putting this information on the blockchain by these supply chain companies. So it will be interesting, and I think the way that it currently stands, as you mentioned, there's 4 tiers of staking that is available to users, and I think you get weighted returns also on that.
Mm-hmm.
So the more you stake, the more you get. Which, like I said, all of these things taken into consideration, it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out in terms of making the system affordable for these supply chain companies. Because we were talking right before this video on the sheer number of transactions that some of these manufacturing companies are going to be running into if they're producing 50,000 items of a particular commodity every single day. That's a huge amount of transactions that you're having to facilitate on the VeChain blockchain. So if you can't have a stable price of the token, it's going to be very, very hard to scale that and make it worthwhile to use within your business. So
Yeah, I mean, I would, I guess, kind of argue that 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 that's a I think that's a pretty strong point right now. But similar to how people kind of bash, Bitcoin as a medium exchange or store of value because of the price fluctuations right now, where that's something that's going to level out eventually, where you have this brand new technology, this new, token economy created and structured, where there's going to be a little bit of, volatility as, players start entering the game, as money's being, moved around, and, as I think some of the kinks and the, game theories worked out. Because I think it'd be a mistake to call this, to see this as like a more of a decentralized cryptocurrency, because it really isn't, I guess. I mean, you're paired with a company ownership of the VeChain blockchain, and I don't think that kind of dilutes the value of the ecosystem or the price of the native currencies. I think it's just important to make the, the difference where, we always say is that decentralization does make sense, but centralization, of course, makes sense as, in certain situations where pure decentralization just doesn't make sense in some fashion. If that means, in near term, far, long term, it really doesn't matter. And I think they're trying to create a blend, and I'm really interested to see where it kind of plays out here. I mean, when you see this, like, the vision in the change of this development for VeChain was to build a distributed business ecosystem. So while these other systems kind of exist, like Ethereum or Neo, I think they kind of leave a lot of work to developers and companies themselves when creating tokens and applications. And VeChain being a more centralized, where they can kind of have a little bit more, they can put their hand in this stuff a little bit more, a little heavy-handed. The VeChain has like such an expansive list of partners to kind of start the process and develop these different applications throughout the VeChain Foundation. So they, right off the bat, they're, decentralized slightly, or a little bit more than slightly, you could argue that, to get this off the ground, and simply because it's a trade-off, right? I think with any sort of currency or any sort of technology, there's always going to be trade-offs.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You kind of hit the nail on the head by talking about centralization versus decentralization doesn't necessarily count as the be all end all of whether a token is legitimate or not in the cryptocurrency space, because there are very deliberate reasons why you need centralization within something like this, right? So you want the company that is manufacturing these goods to have a central authority in the tracking of their own goods, right? You don't want that necessarily to be decentralized until you get to a point of sale. Once you have a product out in the wild and it can be sold, and you're keeping track of, okay, who owns this legitimate Louis Vuitton bag, okay, that makes sense at that point, that you want it to have that decentralized back behind it, so that that people can't be kind of fudging the system. But up until that point, you want it to be very centralized. You don't want any outside influence impacting the tracking of that particular item, right? So in that sense, the centralization does make complete sense for keeping track of things on a supply chain.
Well,
And you also want a governing authority that can make sure that no outside forces are kind of impacting that.
yeah, and you can't, and you can't really kid yourself when it comes to supply chains, because supply chain, any sort of blockchain solution for supply chains are always going to have that layer of centralization no matter what project it is, right? I mean, to get something on the blockchain initially, I mean, who's going to do that, right? It's going to be a centralized entity. It's going to be some person or some created program to put that real world asset onto the blockchain, right? Oracles aren't here yet. They're still a few years off. We've talked about this with Chainlink, and there's a few others working on it right now. But without these sort of oracles or any sort of decentralized way to get these real world assets on the blockchain, you're going to have this centralization issue. So they kind of just went full steam at it. Well, let's just do it, right? The most efficient way we can think of to leverage everything we have, and let's use this advantage we have and leap forward and become that all-in-one business solution for the blockchain. That's kind of how I view it. I mean, do you have anything to add at the end here? I'm not too sure. I guess we could talk about all the different partners, but I think those are covered by plenty of other people.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, you can see on their website they've got a lot of stuff listed there on everyone who's kind of on board with VeChain, which is impressive. They have a very impressive list of people that are wanting to work with them. So that is a benefit. That's lending credibility to the platform. Mm-hmm. It'll just be interesting to see if they can capitalize on it. Can they actually put this stuff in practice to scale in a way that's affordable for these companies to utilize? Because if it's not, no one's going to use it.
Yep. No, that's well said. Well, I guess give us a follow, guys. Socials in the description. Subscribe, and we're going to be talking about more tokens in the top 100 here, along with some trading ideas. And I'd love to start charting VeChain a little bit more. I haven't really since that swap. I ended up did swapping, but I haven't traded them since. I know it's been a while, but I guess until next time, guys.